The hall smelled of polish and ceremony, brass, leather, and the faint bite of disinfectant. Floodlights gleamed off rows of medals and shined boots, casting long reflections across the marble floor. The air thrummed with quiet pride, with the weight of uniforms pressed to perfection and faces set in the rigid calm of military formality. At the far end of the room, a broad banner hung above the stage, Annual Commendation Ceremony, Fort Kestrel. Beneath it, a line of dignitaries waited, their decorations flashing under the light like captured suns. In the third row, seat 23, a woman sat perfectly still. Civilian clothes, a modest navy blouse, dark slacks, shoes polished but old. Her posture was straight, her hands folded over a small clutch resting on her lap. A gray beret shadowed most of her face, but what little showed spoke of years rather than age. The faint lines around her mouth, the stillness of someone long accustomed to watching rather than speaking. Whispers darted through the rows like static. "Who's she? She doesn't work here. She shouldn't even be in this section." Somebody chuckled softly, not cruelly, just curiously. No one recognized her, and on a base like this, anonymity stood out more than rank. The master of ceremonies, a major with the rhythm of routine in his voice, stepped to the podium and began the formalities. Commendations for bravery, for service, for leadership. The hall applauded at every name, every handshake, every salute. Cameras clicked, the flag swayed lightly in the hum of the ceiling fans, and the orchestra in the corner prepared the same tune they'd played every year. At the far left of the stage, Lieutenant Bryce Alden straightened his uniform with a gloved tug, ensuring every crease held, every ribbon faced forward. 26 years old and already known across the base, bright, ambitious, and as many whispered, a little too pleased with himself. His smile carried the sharpness of a man who mistook charm for command. He scanned the crowd once, expecting admiration, but his eyes snagged instead on the woman in civilian clothes. "What's she doing here?" he muttered to the officer beside him. The other shrugged. "Probably a guest of one of the colonels. Ignore her." But Bryce didn't ignore her. Every so often his eyes returned to her, the stillness of her body, the way she didn't fidget, didn't clap, didn't look impressed. He told himself it didn't matter. Today was about him, about the commendation he'd waited 3 years for. The ceremony continued. Names rolled off the list, medals pinned, salutes exchanged. And then a pause. The major at the podium frowned slightly, glancing down at his paper, then back to the commanding officer seated behind him. The CO, an older man with a presence that could silence a storm, gave a slow nod. The major cleared his throat. "Before we proceed with the final awards, we have a special recognition to present, one not listed in the program." A low murmur rippled through the hall. The woman in the gray beret lifted her head just slightly, eyes narrowing. The major's voice grew steadier as he read the next line. "This recognition is to honor an individual whose service predates most of us here, someone who served with distinction in classified operations, whose contribution to our nation has only recently been declassified." The room leaned forward as one. The officers exchanged puzzled glances. The lieutenant frowned. The major continued, "Would Ms. Mara Levin please come forward?" Silence. Then every head turned. The woman in seat 23 did not move at first. Her fingers tightened slightly on her clutch. A flicker, memory, maybe disbelief, crossed her features. Then she rose. The scrape of her chair on the marble echoed like a gunshot in the quiet hall. She began walking slow, measured, the gray beret dipping slightly as she passed each row of uniforms. Conversations died mid-sentence. The orchestra's instruments hung silent. Lieutenant Alden watched her approach, irritation tightening his jaw. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. "A civilian." The CO didn't answer. He only watched, his gaze fixed on her like he was seeing something no one else could. When Mara reached the front, the major stepped aside uncertainly, unsure whether to salute or simply gesture. She stopped at the edge of the stage, not quite stepping up, her hands at her sides. "Miss Levin," the major began carefully, "if you would." Her eyes lifted toward the CO, and for a brief instant, the quiet room felt smaller, the air denser. Outside, through the glass doors, the flag stirred in the wind. Inside, every uniformed man and woman stared, unblinking, at the unassuming civilian who had just been called to stand among heroes and somehow, without a word, already commanded the room. Lieutenant Bryce Alden moved first, his polished boots clicking sharply against the marble as he stepped off the line of officers. His shoulders squared, chest out, the medals on his dress blues glinting under the lights like small suns. The woman was halfway up the steps, the soft sound of her shoes almost lost beneath the hum of whispers that had begun to spread through the hall. She didn't look left or right, didn't hurry or hesitate. She simply moved forward, eyes steady, as if she belonged there. Bryce couldn't stand it. This was his moment, his commendation, his ceremony. He had rehearsed this day in his head for months. And now some gray-haired civilian, pulled from nowhere, was walking straight toward the stage like she owned it. The disrespect was unbearable. "Ma'am," he said, stepping in front of her, hand raised in a stiff, almost mocking gesture of authority. "This part of the ceremony is for active service personnel, not visitors." A ripple of quiet laughter ran through the rows behind him. A few of his peers exchanged smirks, the kind reserved for when someone says what everyone else is thinking but doesn't dare speak aloud. She didn't stop. Didn't even blink. "Ma'am," Bryce repeated, louder this time, his voice echoing through the vaulted room. "You need to return to your seat." The woman, Mara Levin, looked up at him then, her face unreadable beneath the shadow of her gray beret. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. Hers were not soft, not uncertain. They were calm and impossibly old, the kind that had seen more than any man in that room could imagine. Bryce felt a flicker of something he didn't understand, discomfort, maybe, but pride smothered it before it could settle. "Lieutenant," the commanding officer's voice cut through the hall, sharp and controlled. Bryce turned halfway toward him, offering a half-smile that bordered on defiance. "Sir, I'm just maintaining order. We have civilians walking up too." He didn't finish. The woman had stopped now, inches away from him. The faint scent of worn leather and age clung to her jacket. Her right hand rose slowly, not in protest, but with deliberate purpose. She pinched the edge of her sleeve and turned it outward, revealing a small, frayed insignia stitched there, its threads faded but intact, the outline of a winged figure carrying a lightning bolt. The laughter died instantly. The silence that followed had weight to it, like air before a storm. The CO's expression changed in a way no one had ever seen. The rigid mask of command slipped, replaced by something that looked like disbelief and reverence. His chair scraped back as he rose to his feet. "Lieutenant," he said again, quieter now. Bryce blinked, unsure. "Sir, I don't." "Stand down." The words were calm, but there was iron behind them. Every soldier in the room felt it. Bryce hesitated. "Sir, she's..." The CO stepped forward, his boots echoing with each measured stride. "Do you have any idea who that insignia belongs to?" The lieutenant faltered, his mouth parting. Around them, the audience sat frozen, no coughs, no whispers, no movement. "That," the CO continued, stopping just short of them, "is the mark of Echo Division. A unit classified above top secret. Black Ops so deep half the Pentagon doesn't know they existed." His voice softened, eyes never leaving Mara's sleeve. "Until now, I thought none of them made it back." Bryce's throat tightened. His polished certainty began to crack. Mara said nothing. She simply lowered her hand, the insignia disappearing beneath the fold of her sleeve again. Her gaze lingered on the CO, and for the first time, a trace of something human, sorrow, perhaps, flickered in her expression. The CO straightened, his voice carrying the full weight of command as he turned to the stunned audience. "Lieutenant Alden," he said, each word like the pull of a trigger, "you will stand down immediately." Bryce swallowed hard, the blood draining from his face. "Yes, sir," his voice came out barely above a whisper. Then the CO looked at Mara again, and the tone of his words changed, quiet, steady, reverent. "She outranks everyone here." Gasps broke the silence, sharp intakes of breath as realization rippled through the room. Some of the younger recruits shifted uneasily, unsure if they should stand or salute. Cameras that had been aimed for photo ops now hung motionless, forgotten. Bryce stepped back, eyes wide, shame burning in his chest. Mara brushed past him without a word, her movements unhurried, dignified. The CO saluted her, a crisp, perfect motion, and in that moment, every person in the hall understood. This wasn't a guest. This was history, walking among them. The commanding officer stopped before her, his chest rising and falling with something more than breath, a mixture of awe and disbelief that stripped years of command from his face. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The hall was still except for the faint hum of the overhead lights and the echo of one last camera shutter that clicked and then went dead. Then the CO did something that froze every man and woman in uniform. He drew himself to full height, heels aligned, chin lifted, and with solemn precision, he saluted the woman before him. The air seemed to fold in on itself. Gasps broke like glass through the quiet. Every officer on stage instinctively rose, uncertain whether to follow or simply stand witness. The woman, the civilian who had walked in without ceremony or pretense, returned the salute slowly, her hand steady as stone. Then, with quiet grace, she reached up and removed her beret. Her hair, streaked silver through black, fell to her shoulders. The beret she pressed against her chest, over the faint shape of the insignia beneath her jacket, that winged emblem with the lightning bolt. The CO's eyes glistened as he looked at it, a man recognizing a ghost from a war the world had forgotten. "Colonel Mara Levin," he said at last, voice low, reverent. The name moved through the room like a current. A few older officers gasped softly, one whispering the name as though afraid it might disappear again if spoken too loud. For 15 years, the files had listed her as missing in action. 15 years since Operation Black Harvest, a mission wrapped in more secrecy than truth. Every document redacted, every testimony buried. They said the entire Echo Division had vanished in enemy territory, no survivors. But here she stood, alive. The lieutenant's face drained of color, his proud stance collapsing under the weight of realization. He looked suddenly smaller, like a boy who'd stumbled into a legend and only now understood where he stood. The CO turned toward the audience, his voice carrying through the hall, not in command now, but in tribute. "Some of you weren't even born when Echo Division operated," he began. "You've read their tactics in textbooks, studied their maneuvers in simulations, but what you don't know is that the foundation of half our modern doctrine came from missions they carried out in silence. They didn't get medals. They didn't get parades. They disappeared so the rest of us could stand here." He turned back to her, eyes heavy with memory. Colonel Levin was one of the first. The architect of infiltration strategies still used today. She led missions with no backup, no extraction guarantee. Her unit dismantled networks the world never knew existed. And when they didn't come home, we built our future on what they left behind. Mara said nothing. She didn't smile. Her expression was the kind of calm that came only from living through too much, the peace of someone who had stopped needing to be understood. "You don't see her rank on paper," the CO said quietly, his voice softening as he turned again toward the stunned officers, "because it's written in sacrifice." The hall remained silent. Not even the photographers dared raise a camera now. Every soldier, every officer, every young recruit who had whispered or smirked now stared as though they stood before a monument rather than a woman. The weight of unspoken years hung thick between them, the kind of history no archive could capture. The lieutenant took a hesitant step forward, his voice caught in his throat. "Colonel," he said, barely audible, I didn't know." Mara looked at him, not unkindly, not with anger or pride, simply looked. "Most don't," she said. Her voice was soft, yet carried through the entire room. "That's the point." A murmur swept through the ranks, not of gossip this time, but of quiet reverence. Soldiers straightened unconsciously, their boots planted firmer, as though the ground beneath them had become sacred. The CO nodded once to her, then addressed the hall again. "Remember this face. Remember that service isn't always seen, and that valor doesn't always wear new fabric." His tone deepened, solemn. "Colonel Levin was declared dead 15 years ago. I think it's time we corrected that mistake. Applause didn't erupt, it began softly, a single clap, hesitant, then another, until the sound swelled and filled the hall. The noise wasn't celebration, it was redemption. Mara stood through it, eyes lowered, beret still pressed against her chest. The light from the overhead fixtures caught the edge of her insignia, and, for an instant, it gleamed not as something polished, but as something remembered. The sound came first, the hard, unified rhythm of boots striking the floor as every soldier in the hall rose to attention. It wasn't commanded. It happened naturally, like instinct. The air thickened with respect so palpable it felt alive, humming in the space between breaths. Hundreds of bodies moved as one, standing for a woman who had walked in as a stranger and revealed herself as something greater than legend. The echo of that synchronized motion filled the hall and then faded into reverent silence. Mara Levin stood in the center of the stage, framed by the soft glow of the overhead lights. Her jacket looked older now, worn at the edges, but somehow it outshone every metal in the room. The weight of years of memory, loss, and silence clung to her, but her posture never faltered. She didn't bask in it, didn't meet the cameras or seek the attention. She stood as she always had, quietly, deliberately, like a mountain weathered but unbroken. Lieutenant Bryce Alden stepped forward from the front row, his face pale, his earlier arrogance stripped clean away. He moved with hesitation, each step measured as if crossing sacred ground. The crowd parted for him without a word, watching the transformation of a man who, only minutes before, had nearly dismissed a living monument. When he reached her, he stopped just short of arm's length. For a heartbeat, he couldn't seem to breathe. Then, with both hands trembling, he lifted his arm into a perfect salute. The gesture was rigid, sharp, but the emotion behind it was anything but mechanical. It was apology, reverence, redemption. Mara's eyes met his, steady and unreadable. She returned the salute with a single nod, small, dignified, final. No triumph, no gloating, only acknowledgement. Then she lowered her hand, and he did the same, his throat tight as he stepped back into formation. The flash of cameras began, journalists, officers, enlisted men trying to capture a piece of history with their phones. Yet none of them could capture what truly mattered, the look in her eyes. They weren't proud or triumphant. They were distant, shadowed by memories that didn't fit neatly into ceremonies or plaques. Every flash of light reminded her of the flares that once lit foreign skies, of comrades who never came home, of missions buried under silence. The CO walked toward the back of the stage, where a dark velvet cover hung over a mounted plaque. With a quiet motion, he drew it aside. Beneath the cloth, gold letters gleamed against black marble. Colonel Mara Levin, Echo Division. Service beyond record. Gasps turned into soft murmurs. The CO faced the audience again, his voice low but clear. "This is not a ceremony," he said. "It's a correction. A restoration of truth." He turned to Mara, eyes gleaming. For 15 years, her name was a ghost. From this day forward, it will stand here, a reminder that real service doesn't always make the news. Some missions succeed in silence. Some heroes go unseen. The applause began, not sharp and celebratory, but slow, deep, and human. It started with the CO himself, then spread across the room until the sound rolled like thunder through the hall. There was no cheering, no shouting, only the kind of applause that came from the soul, gratitude spoken through the hands of those who understood the cost of sacrifice. Mara stood quietly, her expression softening just slightly. The applause washed over her like distant rain. She reached up, fingers brushing the insignia on her sleeve, the faded wing and lightning bolt that had carried her through darkness and home again. When the clapping finally died, she stepped down from the stage. The crowd parted for her once more, soldiers standing stiff as she passed, some with tears threatening to fall. The lieutenant straightened his shoulders as she walked by, the echo of her steps marking something irreversible in him, a lesson that would follow him for the rest of his career. At the doorway, Mara paused. She looked back once, her eyes sweeping over the room, over the faces that would remember this moment far longer than they realized. Then, with a faint, tired smile, she turned and walked into the corridor, the sound of her footsteps fading like a heartbeat into silence. The CEO remained on stage, his gaze fixed where she had stood. He turned to the assembled ranks, his voice carrying with quiet power. "Remember this day," he said. "Some ranks are worn on the shoulder. Others are carved in history." No one spoke after that. They didn't need to. Because everyone in that hall, from the oldest officer to the newest recruit, understood that they had just witnessed something they'd tell their children about one day. And though the cameras captured her image, the truth of who she was would never fit in a photograph. It would live instead in silence, in respect, and in the unspoken promise that history would not forget her again.